Hi everyone, today we're going to be continuing comparing fractions using a number line. So our first step is to make our number lines. So for part A, it wants us to cut it into halves. Now, if I'm cutting it into halves, that means that I want two equal parts for every whole number. So I'm going to start by drawing my three fraction bars. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to cut them into two equal pieces. So I'm going to cut this in half, this in half. That could be a little bit better. Remember, we want to be as accurate as possible, especially since we're going to be connecting to other number lines today. And half here. Okay. Now, it wants me to place these fractions. So for now, I'm just going to place these fractions so I don't get overwhelmed. So it wants 3 halves. Let's start with that. 0 halves, 1 half, 2 halves, 3 halves. Okay, so I'm going to put 3 halves here. Next up, it wants 5 halves. So I'm going to start at 3 halves, 4 halves, 5 halves. And it wants 4 halves, which is actually in the middle. Okay, so part A is good. Now I'm going to move on to fourths. Okay, so it's still from 0 to 3. So I'm actually going to line up my 1 and my 2 to make sure that I'm as accurate as possible. I'm going to draw my fraction bars again. Okay, now for fourths, I always want to cut it in half first, try to make that as close as possible, and then cut it in half again. Once again, cut it in half first, then in half again. Last one. Now, as you can see, all of my halves and whole numbers are lining up, which is perfect. Okay, so they want me to label 6/4, 9/4, and 11/4. Let's start with 6/4. So I could start at 0/4 and count, but I know that 4/4 is one whole. So I'm going to start here. 4/4, 5/4, 6/4. Okay, I did that one. The next biggest is 9/4. So 6/4, 7/4, 8/4, 9/4. And lastly, 11/4. So 9/4, 10/4, 11/4. Okay, and now I'm going to do 8ths. And we're going to continue the pattern of just chopping it in half again. So first things first, I need to get my whole numbers lined up. So I have my 1 and my 2. And I'm going to draw my fraction bars. So I know that 4 times 2 is 8. So first I'm just going to cut it in fourths again. And then I'm going to cut it in 8. So I have to cut each piece again. Fourths, eighths. Now I know that this is hard for a lot of us, but the most important thing is just keep practicing, lining it up as best as you can. Okay, I did all my fraction bars, so now I need to do all of my number line. And I can check 0/8, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. Perfect. So 8/8, 9/8, 10/8, 11/8, 12/8, 13/8, 14/8, 15/8, 16/8, which is correct because 16 divided by 8 is 2. And it looks like all of my numbers are 16/8 and above. So I'm going to do 16/8 since I'm there. I'm going to draw all my lines. So it's like you're drawing an invisible line right here. So next I want 19/8, 16/8, 17/8, 18/8, 19/8. And I'm going to draw dots actually just so that I can see clearly where that number is supposed to be. And 24/8, which actually 24 divided by 8 is 3. So I know that this is 24/8. I'm going to go back and label these dots because this will come in handy. So right now we haven't actually done any comparing, but we're about to. Okay, I'm going to zoom out so that you can see my problems. Okay, the first two fractions I'm comparing are 6/4 and 9/4. Now both of these are fourths, which means I can use the same number line. So as I can see, here I have 6/4 and here I have 9/4. Now, in order to figure out which one's bigger, I want to figure out which one's further away from 0. So as you can see, this one is further away from 0, which means I would have shaded more. So this is my bigger fraction, and the alligator eats the bigger fraction. So my answer is less than. 6/4 is less than 9/4. And I know that because 6/4 is closer to 0. Okay, next up is 3/2 and 5/2. So these are both halves, which means I can go to my halves number line. Here I have 3/2, here I have 5/2. So I'm looking for the one that is further away from 0, and it looks like 5/2 is the most, because if I were to shade, I would shade more for 5/2 than I would for 3/2. So 3/2 is less than 5/2. All right, 19/8 and 16/8. So these are both 8s, so they're on the same number line. So I have 19/8 is here and 16/8 is here. As you can see, 19/8 is further away from 0, which means 19/8 is bigger. So I'm going to say 19/8 is greater than 16/8. Okay, those were all on the same fraction bar, but now we're going to have to look at different fraction bars. So I have 16/8 and 3/2. So I'm looking at this fraction and this fraction. So as you can see, 16/8 is further away from 0. 16/8 is the same as 4/2, which is bigger than 3/2. So 16/8 is greater than 3/2. Okay, I'm going to erase that so that I don't get confused. Next up is 9/4 and 19/8. So I see 9/4 is here and 19/8 is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this dot down so that I can see. So 9/4 is actually right here, which means that 19/8 is bigger. So 9/4 is less than 19/8. Okay, 4/2 and 16/8. So I have 4/2 and 16/8. It looks like they're in the same spot. And we can check because 4/2 is the same as 2 and 16/8 is the same as 2. So these two are equal. They're the same size. Okay, 6/4 and 16/8. So 16/8 again, and 6/4. So as you can see, 16/8 is further away from 0 than 6/4. So 16/8 is bigger. 5/2 and 9/4. Okay, I have 5/2 and 9/4. Now these are pretty close, so I want to double check. So I'm going to say 5/2 is here. Okay, that means that 5/2 is bigger. Last one, 24/8 and 11/4. Let me erase this really quick. Okay, so 24/8 and 11/4. So I can tell that 24/8 is on the whole number 3. So that would be right here, 24/8. And 11/4 is here. So 24/8 is bigger. All right, and that is our lesson for today.